And so I will go ahead and jump in, and I'll be watching my time as I go. So let me go ahead and begin. So I'm Diane Neubauer. I do have a PhD. I cannot escape that at this point, but I will tell you about my teaching history. So I am not just somebody that works at a university level, but I do now work there. Let me go ahead and jump into the next slide, and I will keep myself better on track. So my agenda for this webinar, first to give you a little background on me and why would I know something about this topic. I'll then explain some assumptions that I'll make, things that I'm going to presume that we share as goals, as thinking, as ways of operating in our language classrooms. And then we'll dive into more of the meaty parts of this webinar, techniques to increase comprehensibility of language, and then some ways to avoid boring but still comprehensible use of language. What I have found in my teaching practice is sometimes we focus so much on comprehension, it gets boring. And there are some things that I've learned over time that I think may help in avoiding some of that. So we'll be doing some of that. Who am I? When you signed up, you had a little bio of me. I think I taught K-12 Mandarin Chinese in the US for 10 years. So I had mostly 4th grade through 8th grade at one school, 9th grade through 12th grade at another school, and 9th grade through 12th grade at a third school across those 10 years of time. I've taught in person and online. I have also taught the very youngest children, the ones 3rd grade and under, but not as much, just as an after school thing mostly. So I've had a lot of range of ages, range of proficiency, although most of my students were novice and a few were intermediate. And since I left the K-12 classroom, I went back to get a PhD. And so that took me 5 years, and then I'm 2 years out from that. So during my PhD time, I was still teaching Mandarin Chinese, but online, and mainly with adults, some teens and preteens as well. And so I continue to do that now. I'm taking a little break this semester while I'm new at a university job. So I'm currently at the University of Louisville in Kentucky, teaching mainly focused on my job and mainly focused on multilingual education. So thinking about people whose language is not English who are in our US classroom contexts, and preparing teachers to work with students like that to understand language and language acquisition. So that's my main background. I love doing talks like this and getting to know teachers and thinking about language and how to make that really a rich experience within our classroom settings. So that's why I suggested this topic tonight. So let me continue on. Some assumptions that I'll make. I'm going to presume that today we share the main goal of having our students acquire language or develop proficiency, not study about the language. And in some ways, I'm not even thinking about like getting them through a test per se. I'm thinking about them being able to function communicatively with language. They can understand it, they can interpret it, they can interact with others through it, that they develop the ability over time to produce language and to present through that, to reference some of the actful modes of communication there. So that's what I'm going to presume that we're all really aiming for as a main goal. I also have the goal of intercultural competence for my students and really understanding how to work within different cultures, but that's not so much in focus tonight. I also will presume that you also value target language use for communicative purposes. So not just vocabulary practice on a flashcard, but using the language to do something with it, to interpret text, to interpret what we hear, to respond to questions and answers that build on each other, that we want to use a lot of target language in the classroom and that you share that goal. So I'll just presume that that's one of the things that you're into. However, I think that those two first goals have some challenges. One is ensuring that our students can understand the target language that they hear, that they read. And Also, that we need to ensure that our students are not so bored that they disengage, that they stop thinking about the language, they stop feeling something in our classroom, they stop doing anything, they stop behaving in ways that we hope that they will be really participating and involved in the activities we plan for them. So I think those are both very challenging things, whether you're a new teacher or you have been teaching for 25 years. Every class seems to be a little bit different. And what I continue to hear post-COVID is that it is still a very challenging time for some students who seem to lack some of the skills socially with listening, with responding to peers, that maybe it's not just COVID, maybe it's phone addiction and things like that. So these are even more perhaps challenging in recent years. So I'm going to be keeping those in mind. And I have one final assumption I will make. I think that many instructional activities could work well for that goal of language proficiency development and prevalent use of the target language. But they're not the focus this evening. There are many great webinars on specific instructional activities. I'm going to be thinking in this little image helps me remember this. So the way I like to think about language classrooms, that we've got kind of a big overarching goal. So I'm going to talk about some of those. So kind of the third biggest level. And then there's kind of the middle level that is, what activities do we plan? I'm going to mostly skip that tonight. I'll reference some, but I won't go into depth talking through how to do them. I'll presume you're going to be able to do that in another webinar, another training that you attend. And so there's that level of instructional activities. And then at the very ground level, there's turn-by-turn things like I say this, I look at my student looks back at me and goes, and then I go, and I restate it, but I state it slower. Like that kind of slow turn-by-turn thing is the really, I think it's the heartbeat of language teaching. I am going to talk about that. So we're going to be thinking about those micro level skills to help make language comprehensible. And we're going to be thinking about the big level, what's my purpose here? What are we really trying to do level tonight? And this Romanesco cauliflower helps me remember that there's complexity at every level of this. And we can really go into great depth and think about those turn-by-turn things, and as well as think really big picture, as well as think, what do I plan lesson by lesson? So that's where my mindset is with these things. So comprehensibility is the first part of what I would like to address. First, a definition. Let me see if I should advance. Right. I should tell you now. My definition here for comprehensibility is that we're going to interpret it based on what the students experience, not what we think they should experience, not what modifications we maybe are making to the way that we're presenting language to students or using language with students. We're going to be thinking about, what do they actually understand right now? How are they interpreting messages in the target language as they hear them, as they read them, as they interact with them? So we as teachers probably will find it too easy because our proficiency is way above a student, especially a novice level student, but also above our intermediate students. And so we need to learn to interpret from their perspective in order to understand what comprehensibility is. And some of the ways that we can do that are then through interacting with them to check on students. So we'll get into that in just a moment. So we're going to scaffold in new language carefully. And what I mean here is, let's say there's a new phrase that we want to ensure our students are understanding. Maybe there's a specific vocabulary word, maybe it's a short phrase, maybe it's a sentence that we want to ensure that they're understanding. We're going to be scaffolding in new language carefully. So not using lots and lots of new language all at once, and not using lists of language without context, if that makes sense. So we're going to want to present language in context, maybe asking questions, maybe making a sentence statement and seeing if students agree or disagree with that statement. For an example, right here where I am now, I don't think you can hear it, but it is raining fairly hard right now. And I could say, ooh, it's raining again tonight. Did you notice it's raining? And now I'm waiting. So let's say raining is that new phrase. I'm going to try to stick with that phrase and focus in on that topic for a little bit of time to ensure that it is something that's clear. Let's say it's a brand new phrase for them. Maybe I will draw rain. Maybe I'll look up like this. Oh, raining. Ooh, I'll do some gestures. I'll do some actions like that. But somehow I want to stay with that new language and really slow it down, kind of molasses-like pace, and begin to use that in the context of language that they do already understand. So a little bit new at a time. And then I want to check for their comprehension. So that example with the rain that's going on right now, I've got my drawing of rain up here. I put the word rain in the target language, which I'm not referencing right now. And I am holding my hand under the target language and then sliding over to a shared language if we have one. What I mean by a shared language is, in the US, in many classrooms, you might be able to use English as a shared language. You may need to use Spanish as a shared language. It may be something entirely different. What language or languages do your students already come to your classroom knowing? And if you know that language or one of them, you can use that as a leverage, as a tool to help you confirm the meaning and to check for comprehension on occasion. So a little bit of new and checking for comprehension. So I'm tracking my students in the classroom. I'm looking for some sort of affect, something on their face, on their body. Are they looking where I'm pointing as I'm doing it? When I'm doing this, do they seem to understand, like, I'm not actually talking about the ceiling, I'm talking about imagining being outside and like, ooh, it's wet. So I'm tracking with my students in that kind of more subtle way, but I'm also going to ask them questions that I want to see if they can tell. Like, is it snowing yet? No. Is it raining though? Yeah, raining. Do you think it's raining hard or softly? Hard rain, soft rain. Oh, you think soft rain, you think hard rain. Well, it is raining. That's for sure. So there's things like that. So again, we're using a little bit of language. We're using it in context. We're trying to build something more than just rain. Say it with me. Rain, rain, rain. Looking at a flashcard picture. I mean, that could be helpful, but I want to do more than that. So that's what I mean by scaffolding it in carefully. Another point about this is sheltering new language, and I've already referenced this a little bit. So if we're using some new words, some new phrases, staying with the same thing for a while and avoiding adding in lots of new things all at once. So ironically, a more traditional textbook kind of a format will give you a long list of vocabulary right up front. And I think it's made language teachers think, well, what I should do is just kind of practice and drill a long list of vocabulary words, and then we'll get to use the language after that. But what happens when we're doing that kind of isolated word practice, it sort of decontextualizes it. It's not for communication. We want to shelter how much is new at once, and we want to kind of keep it in that familiar frame. So as we're starting to use that language and we're seeing, how are my students reacting? Not just one or two students, but the majority of the students willing to participate that day. So you're sheltering the language. This is the way I think of it instead of just repetition. So I'm wanting to really stick with a topic that is narrow and deep rather than jumping from thing to thing. So as I was doing that with rain, I started talking about that. Let's say to go a little deeper with it, I might ask about comparing to other students' feelings about rain. Do you like rain? When do you like rain? Do you like warm rain or cold rain? Things like that We could track it over time, and then I could refer back to it. If we had a calendar and we tracked the weather each day, we could go back and say, how many times has it rained this month? Is that average, or is it really extreme amounts of rain for our region? We could compare it to another place in the world, and we're still on rain. We keep going narrower and deeper, though, with that same topic. As that word is new, we might choose to do that for a while with our students if we really want to help them get the sense of how to use this new piece of language in context and really build and scaffold that well. So instead of asking 10 different students random questions, like sometimes I've seen like a traditional textbook exercise where it's kind of unconnected to anything else. They're just practicing something with language. Instead, we're going to build. So the questions all relate to the same topic. We're developing the topic together based on what my students do to respond to me. And so far, the examples I was giving were for that more novice level, beginning-ish student. If we are doing something with more advanced proficiency students, we're still going to be thinking about sheltering new language and developing topics that are narrow and deep. We can just do that using more of their prior language available. So if they're a more intermediate low-ish student, they can talk in simple paragraphs, they can definitely string sentences together, and they can understand you when you're talking at that level, where you definitely can draw in on a lot of their prior language. But as that new topic develops, you want to stay with that for a while so it's familiar. And then as we're doing this kind of thing with the language with our students, carefully bringing in new language, a few minutes of focus on that before maybe one more item or one more phrasing, something like that. We're going to use comprehension supports. And so things like anything that makes it more visual. So images that we can show them in a video, on a photograph, drawings that we can put on the board or on a computer screen, or we can ask a student to do and show, oh yeah, that's it, see? Here's our thing. We use body language, which I'm doing a little bit, kind of gesturing a little bit, but I also just like the way that I look at students helps them understand where I'm talking, or where my gaze is, helps them to understand what to look at and what to maybe get some help with their comprehension from. One small tip about that with pointing at something. I know I don't have anything. Let me go over here. I have something up on the wall. And if you know me, you're not surprised. I have a chicken on a calendar. Let's say I wanted to talk about this chicken. Instead of just that, I'm going to point, oh, look at the chicken. Look at her head. Look at her nice head. Here's my head. Then there's the chicken's head. Where is your head? Oh, you got it. Yes, yes. So the chicken's head is here. Let's think about how big is her head compared to here. Okay. So I'm pointing and I'm holding my hand there a long time while I'm wanting them to focus on a specific area. Same thing with words on the board. So if we want them to follow the meaning and the words that we've written up, that you're imagining with me, I have written here. We're going to hold our hand there a long time and help their eyes track with that. So I can point here and look at them and glance back and back when I'm in a in-person classroom. So I'm also going to use voice. So we can moderate our voice. We can give emphasis to certain words. We can put emotion in our voice. And sometimes I hear people talk about, well, I'm not dramatic, or I'm not very extroverted. I am, in fact, not either. If you don't feel comfortable doing something that's dramatic, though, don't. There are a lot of other tools. There are the images, there's drawing, there's body language, there's the shared language when we have that shared language with our students. There are other ways to do things. And so if any of these things feels super uncomfortable, try a little bit at a time, and maybe it will build for you. It did for me. It took me a while to do that, and I feel pretty comfortable being a little bit exaggerated sometimes and rather theatrical. but not like high energy theater. So you can definitely do this as much as you would like. These are just the kinds of things that are supportive of comprehension. Another resource, let's see, is objects. Things that you can hold, that you can manipulate, actions that you can actually demonstrate through things like total physical response, where we're giving, we often would not use a shared language in that point. We would say things like, raise your hand, raise both hands, put your hands down, but okay, and then put your both hands up quickly. And so like if we're slowly building, right? Again, I didn't do a very good slow build there. If we are doing a successful slow building there, we're going to be able to add a little bit more detail every few times that we're doing those TPR commands. And by our actions, we're demonstrating what the meaning is. So that too is another way. So that is comprehensibility. I'm going to pause here just briefly and see, David, is there anything that's pressing that relates to comprehensibility before we move to the next part?
Just got a question.
Okay.
I'll read it off for you. It says,
Oh,
occasionally
thank you,
my
if you would.
students would request breaking away from a normal lesson by watching a movie. I think it's a good idea to follow up with movie talk, and then the next day, when they're still excited about the story topic. But this means that I have to do some prep to set up the talk, more work to get it all in place. In your opinion and experience, how much or little prep is sufficient for productive movie talk?
Oh, okay. Let's see. That is a pretty specific question. Can I hold it until the end? It does relate to comprehensibility, but it's a little, I think it would take a little bit more time to address here. And I want to make sure we get to the second part of this first, I think. I think it might help with some of the decision making there too. Is there anything else that relates closely to any of the points that I brought up so far?
That's the only question listed. Sorry.
Oh, is it? Okay, I see two on the Q&A, but I don't have it open. So yeah, we'll see those at the end then. So, and I'll definitely come back to the question about movie talk. So. A final point about comprehensibility is that there is one more kind of comprehensibility. We talked about making the target language comprehensible, but there is another thing that we need to make comprehensible to our students, and that is instructions. So if you have ever had students be confused just because they don't know what the activity is expecting of them, they don't know what to do, how to participate, tell them. Use whatever means necessary to make sure that they understand what you're expecting them to do and what good success in that activity will look like. So I found that teaching with a more comprehension-based framework and wanting to communicate with students and actually build things with them through the language during the class felt very strange to students who had experienced a more typical like something where things were scripted for them, or they were repeating after the teacher, or reading things aloud, or doing comprehension questions only, where we were trying to create something with the language together and developing it right there in the classroom. It felt a little uncomfortable to them. So telling them that what we're doing right now is developing their listening ability and their comprehension of the language, their ability to interpret messages in the language, from which they're going to be developing their own ability to produce messages in the language, and that will happen in a long-term process, and that today we're going to do something with one of these purposes that I'm about to introduce in the second part that I'll get to. So telling them clearly, you're going to be listening and responding to questions. You're going to be looking at the things in the room. You're going to be helping me make a decision about XYZ at the end of this 10 minutes that we have, or 20 minutes. And I'm expecting that you're going to try to avoid using English if this is a class that has English as their first language. So telling them what those instructions are and reminding them so that if you don't get responses from students, it may just be the issue of they don't know what you're looking for. So the second part that I want to address is communicative purpose. So a reason for communicating might be a way to rephrase that. Something that I think might be a forgotten element in language teaching. Sometimes we think it's communication if students are talking, but those aren't equal to each other. It might mean there's communication happening if students are talking. It might mean they're parroting something that they're not even really understanding. It might mean they're just repeating something to practice it. So we want to really do something more than just those things with the language with them. So I think sometimes it comes intuitively for really gifted teachers, teachers who've really seen engaging lessons do this kind of thing. But I don't think we always think of it. We sometimes forget. And so putting it back on our radar, I think, has been one of the more helpful things that I have found in my own teaching experience. Going from just thinking about language comprehension and what I was doing to help them understand language to thinking about what were we doing with the language, even when they were at that beginning level. It's been something that it just feels like there's an extra hook on them engaging with what I was doing in the classroom. And so is it a guarantee that they're not going to be bored? It is not a guarantee. There is no guarantee. But I do think it's really helpful to have this sense of some kind of purpose. So that's the big picture. We'll get more specific. So what could those be? I'm relying on Bill Van Patten's definition of communication and of communicative purpose. So he's thinking that those first two on my list here, that learning about each other is a legitimate reason for communication. We ask about each other's experience, opinions, home life, cautiously, not to pry into their private life, but what they wish to offer. We ask about their hopes, their future dreams. We learn about each other through those kinds of things. We share about ourselves to some degree, and sometimes as teachers as well. So learning about each other is a legitimate reason for using language. And if we're learning about each other through the activities in our classroom, then I would say that has a true communicative purpose. We can also learn about the world. And so this could be things like learning about history, learning about science topics, learning about geography, or learning about the cultures around the world, learning about something that might be from outside our classroom, but bringing it into the classroom where we're thinking about it and we're learning to interpret and understand and interact with it. One of my favorites with learning about the world has been planning units around animals, an animal that's important in the target language, learning all about different aspects of that animal at the proficiency appropriate level, where I'm carefully sheltering new language, not introducing too many new things at once, just really focusing in on a little bit at a time and going narrow and deep with the topic first. And so that is one possibility of learning about the world. And then creating something together. Van Patten kind of is a little bit like maybe entertainment's a third kind of use of it. I like to think of this instead as creating something together. So this could be a story that we're creating together. It could be a prepared story, but we are together imagining it by reading it and by experiencing it together. We're maybe making jokes together. We're doing something through the language to create, to imagine as well. So if those are the three big kinds of purposes, you might be able to start thinking about, okay, so when I do that activity, is one of those kind of arising there? If you're not thinking that it is, are there ways to maybe tweak that activity so that it has more of that purpose, that you're doing something beyond just practicing language when you do the activity, you're learning about each other, about the world, or you're creating something together through the language. So I have a few examples of things that I think fit those from things that I've done with very early novice learners, like I think it was starting on about the 3rd class with them, somewhere around there. Yeah, I don't think it was the 1st class we did this. Teaching Mandarin Chinese online, I've used this a few times now. Predict how many pets the whole class has. And I have everybody silently write down their estimate based on how many people are there. Do they look like a dog lover? You know, what do they expect? Maybe people will result. Like if we add up all the pets that we have, how many do you think the class has? And it adds just that little extra sense of purpose. As we then, I lead the discussion of asking them about how many of different kinds of animals that they do or they don't have. So I'm going narrow and deep. I'm not going to ask them all the animals really quickly, but I might ask one student if they have a cat. And let's say we get a nod. Okay, you have 1 cat or 2 cats? 3 cats? And more? Less? 4. 4 cats? Oh, she has 4 cats. Wow, okay. And now we write it up there. And then we can compare. Does anyone else have 4 cats? And we look for that. And then we're going to find out how many other people have cats. So again, we're adding that into our chart up here. And then eventually we're going to find out what other animals someone has, that kind of thing. And then by the end of that 30 minutes, perhaps, depending on your learners, their stamina for listening, their age and developmental appropriate length of time to listen, maybe for 5 minutes, maybe for 30 minutes. We're going to talk through how many pets the class has, maybe making a chart to tally that up. And then at the end, we can compare, like, okay, we all predicted, did anybody get it right? Did anybody get it close? Was anybody wildly off? Oh, wow, we really were surprised by what our classmates had. So that kind of thing. An extension with that then could be to compare to a target language community. So if we had no pets in a whole group in a classroom, that's pretty low, I would say, in the US. Is that typical or atypical for a target language community? You could search online, see what pets are more popular. That kind of a thing can then build a little bit of that intercultural competence and cultural comparisons that we want to be able to do as well. A second example, I mentioned previously, learning about an animal important to a target language community. I'll describe this a little bit more now. I mentioned I have been teaching Mandarin Chinese for some number of years, and pandas are really important in China, as you may already have thought of. It's kind of a symbol of Chinese diplomacy that they have loaned pandas to different countries around the world to be seen in their zoos. And so pandas are very important and a source of pride. And as far as I know, pandas only live in zoos and in China. So it's a very special animal. I did very, very simple early beginner, right beginning level, first day of class about pandas, where I used a lot of photos of things that were and were not pandas. Baby pandas look really kind of weird. They look like a kind of a deformed kitten, to be honest. They don't look black and white yet, their first 10 days. And so I could show them things that were surprising, that they were learning about pandas, learning about the world, but without having to talk about every detail in the target language. What I did talk about was, is this a panda? Ah, yeah. They recognize an adult panda. What about this red panda? Is this a panda? It is. This is also a panda. We could look at cartoon pandas, like things like from Kung Fu Panda. Wait a minute. Is that the right word? Yes. Yes. Yeah. I'm double guess or second guessing myself on the name of the film. So there's Po, that is the big panda, the great panda, and then his mentor is also a panda. He's just the red panda. So that kind of comes up. So we're exploring, what could pandas look like? Are they big? Are they small? And that was day one, basically. We also pretended. And so we did that third purpose, imagining something together, where we decided, are any of our classmates pandas? And so I had a mask ready to go, and somebody who was willing to play, like, okay, she turned out to be a panda. And so we had the mask out, and could talk about that, like, yeah, okay, so this is a panda in our photo, and we have 3 pandas here. Okay, right. So we're learning about the animal a little bit at a time. That was just one day in class. We learned about what they ate, where did they live. Those are some of the big ideas, and then what makes them special. So if you have an animal that is important in a target language community, a real animal, or maybe even a fictional animal that is important, you could do the same kinds of just careful scaffolding in, and you're learning about the world. And then that creating something imaginative or playful together, that could be stories, like in TPRS, at least in classic TPRS, you're co-creating stories with the students. You're helping to frame some of the content, and then you're giving them choices at different points to find out what they imagine the story details to be. You could look at a photo and ask them, okay, so we see this in the photo. What happened before this? Why is this person there? Obviously, at a little higher proficiency level, some of those questions could be really exploring past, could be exploring the present, and talk about what will happen next. What do you think might happen next? So I love doing that, because we have something to help the teacher point to something in the photo. And so we can use evidence from the photo to talk about why they think something might have happened before, what we see in that. So I love doing photo and backstory discussions. We're imagining, but we're still using something that is there as a scaffold in the room. Jokes are something that we imagine together and then hopefully get a little laugh about. Film or TV, if you use, like someone had asked about movie talk already, it might be a short video. You're using that story, and you're imagining the feelings and the experiences of the people or the characters in the story. And so that too is co-creating something imaginative. It's prepared for you, but it's still communicative purpose. So there's a few examples. There is, I think, another final kind of communicative purpose, or it's not really quite communicative purpose, but it's something I want to put on our radar as well. This is, again, something that I learned over time, and I've heard Liam Printer, if you've followed his podcast, is called The Motivated Classroom. He talks about this as a key element of engagement and motivation specifically. And that is allowing students more choice. So it's in the framework he often works with about motivation, it's autonomy is the word for it. That idea of being able to choose for oneself as much as we can. In a classroom, we have to coordinate many, many people at the same time, but we can still offer choice in activities and in topics. So if you have activities your students know that you have done before, you could offer them a choice between 2. You could offer it open-ended, but I think that might go a little too much choice. Or between 2 or 3 different things might be a little safer bet. I used to do this with high school students, and it's not a big, huge choice, but it felt like there was a little bit of an extra sense that the students were owning the purpose of what we were doing, just that much more. We could also choose topics. I allowed students to choose which of different graded readers we were going to use. And so they would, as a result, focus in on one set of topics or another based on the choice that they did there. So it doesn't have to be a huge open-ended kind of choice, but if you're allowing them to be involved in topic selection and in activities day by day, they are being a part of making the communicative purpose happen. So we have some conclusions that we have a number of different things that we can do, both with language and with things that support the language comprehension. And we can think about ways in which we're going to have a purpose that's more than just practicing the language, more than just understanding the language even, or getting a lot of comprehensible input, but we're going to use those experiences with the language to do something else, to learn about each other, about the world, to create something together. So thank you so much for coming. And I am able to take questions for quite a little bit. So I'm glad we've got at least 15 minutes. And it sounds like there was at least one question. So let me maybe, David, is there anything that I should address here before I go back to that question about movie talk?
I don't know about before, but there's a couple that missed the Q&A. So go ahead and do the one about movie talk, as we're all already familiar about it, and then I'll make sure that we hit on all of them before we're done.
Awesome. So if I remember this one correctly, it's a teacher that uses movie talk, but the students kind of just want to watch it first, like to see it. And then the teacher finds that they need to go back and rebuild in some language so that they can talk about it in greater depth the next day. Can you refresh my mind if I missed some of those details?
Sure. I'll just read it again real quick. It says, occasionally my students would request to break away from normal lessons by watching a movie. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And I want to follow it up with a movie talk the next day when they're still excited about the story and topic. But this means
got
that I
it.
have to do prep to set up the talk. And how much prep do you, in your opinion and
Okay.
experience, think we should be putting in order to accomplish a successful movie talk that's going to be comprehensible?
Okay, so this is going to widely range. When I have done, and here's one piece of the issue there. So we're talking about a whole films because it sounds like they were watching for an extended period of time. I would see if you can use their interest in the film and do something that's a more traditional style of, or I say traditional, the original style of movie talk by Ashley Hastings. So he's actually asked us to avoid saying the term movie talk if what we're talking about is a very targeted, very sheltered language practice, kind of a way of using that video clip or that TV show. His approach was using the full film, but you would play one scene of the film between 30 seconds and 2 minutes long. So you do let them see it just to kind of get a sense of, okay, what's up on screen? They're going to hear some language, but they probably won't understand all of it because it's above their proficiency level. So you would play that scene, and then you would go back to the beginning of that scene, sound off, and now you would narrate at their proficiency level. So you're going to talk about what happens on screen, not everything on screen, but what they need to understand. So by doing that, you really don't have to do a lot of prep in advance if that matches their proficiency level. So I think I need to know their proficiency level. If you're showing a movie, but they don't understand anything at all in the film, I would say maybe you need a break that day. Okay. But you could take that same film, and if you can imagine yourself talking in language your students can understand as you have picked this film as appropriate for your class, try that original format for movie talk, I think. And then your only preparation is kind of getting a sense of, okay, this is one scene, that's the next scene, that's the next scene. And so you know what's going to happen next. So you know when you want to stop it, go back, turn the sound off, watch that same clip again, but talking about it in the target language at a level that they can understand well. So it's very minimal, if any, prep at all, apart from just you being familiar with that video or that TV show. For me in Chinese, that meant it was a very advanced year 2 group that could do that because they needed a breadth of vocabulary, of understanding of sentences, of, because a lot of things could happen in a movie. So I needed to make sure I could talk simply enough to fit their proficiency level, but still be able to tell the story that was happening in the movie. So if you can't do that yet, you want to wait on that film or that video until later, until they have more language acquired. Maybe that helps. If you're thinking of like a more targeted, very carefully scaffolded, very interactive version that's based off of the original format of movie talk. Some of that sometimes takes a little bit of preparation, but again, you don't have to talk about everything that happens in a film or in a photo. You can bring it down to the level of the proficiency of your students. And if you find it just so hard you can't do that, then just hold off on that. Do something that you can talk more comprehensively with them about. And
Excellent.
I welcome follow-up on that if that has a follow-up question. So what else do we have?
I see another question that says, how many TPR actions at a time do you recommend having?
Okay, again, this is going to depend on your students, right? This is going to be the theme in it'll depend on their language background. Let's say 0 beginners, maybe 3 or 4. What I found, you're reacting to your students. And so you're seeing where they start to get fatigued or they start to be like looking like this. Now there's teenage looking like that. And you can play with that. Like, oh, I know you're having fun here. But if they're truly like, they're like, I feel like I'm already understood this and I'm so bored. I can't believe it. Like there's sort of a sense of a difference. It'll depend, but if you're really getting that, I'm feeling like you're grinding us into the ground, you have a choice. Stop doing TPR. That was usually my choice. Or add in a new phrase. Not every time that they show a little bit of boredom, but again, that kind of sheltering the language. So let's say if you're doing something like stand up, what can you add to stand up and sit down that has just that little bit of additional meaning? Stand up quickly, stand up. I've had a list of adverbs on a chart and I could point to that. So I could show the word right there. Stand up happily, stand up sadly. Oh, sit down quickly, stand up quickly. And so by varying it, but not demanding that they master all of these words, I could show them the meaning of the word. Then I was able to do a little more variety, but like 3 or 4 kinds of phrases, again, building over time, just a few minutes at a time worked better for me, but you should see by reacting to what your students give you in response.
Excellent. Another question that I saw that didn't get to the Q&A. The teacher was saying a lot of times when we're talking about a specific topic for a long time, my students check out. Do you have any tips for sort of either bringing them back or getting them engaged again?
And this could be a fatigue thing. If it's a fatigue thing, brain breaks are a great idea. Have everybody stand up, move around, interact with each other a little bit, a little break from intensive target language comprehension. If by staying on one topic for a long time, it means something, look at the way that you're using the language. Are you asking the same kind of question multiple times, or is this varied questions? So that would be a thing to try. If you're often asking like questions that everybody already knows the answer to, think about what can you ask that they don't all know the answer to? Are we learning about ourselves in the classroom as a result? Is there something that you can do to add a little bit more detail in it without going way outside and bringing in lots and lots of new vocabulary all at once? So that's the kind of thing that might be ways to think about it, and then look and see what's happening there. You can also, in that sense of asking your students about activities and topics, ask them maybe in a poll where you give them questions like, when we do this activity, what helps you learn language the most? So then they're thinking like, right, it's not what is most entertaining to me that the teacher needs to think about. It's, yes, the teacher wants me happy, but we need to think about the goals of the classroom. Developing language proficiency is a big one. So making sure that you're kind of guiding them towards that. But then within that, asking, and do you feel confident in your understanding of language after how many minutes of a topic or something like that? Like I scaffolded in kinds of questions like that because I wanted to know how my students perceived themselves to start remembering the way a character in Chinese looked. Because we would do these whole class reading activities, reading aloud together, and then a little bit of work with individual characters, but not much. They would be starting to then read and interact with written texts afterwards. And I really wanted to, like, I had a sense of what some of them thought, but I gave them a poll, put it on, I want to say on Google Forms, and then collected that data and then showed them too, so that they knew like, okay, some of my peers are saying like they really need to see definitely more than 20 times before they're starting to feel like maybe they're getting that. So that when the student who sees it 3 times and feels like I always understand and I always remember after 3 times or something, like they know that I have to teach the whole range of people in the classroom. I can't go with 3 times and now because 2 students are ready, so that might be a thing too. How much time helps you? Do you feel we spend more time on that activity than you, along those lines?
Um, Another question that I see, you're mentioning the conversations about language teaching.
Oh
Is that
yeah.
available on a particular platform, or will we have links to that at the end?
I didn't put a link to it, but if you look up conversations about language teaching, and if you like the kind of way I'm talking about stuff, you might. My friend Reed Riggs and I are podcast hosts there, and we've had one guest so far. Nanta has been a guest for us, but search any podcast platform pretty much. We're definitely Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and we have a YouTube channel. So if you search that phrase and add my name, I think you'll probably find it without trouble.
Excellent. Another short one. What kind of games do you use for fun vocabulary practice? The teacher says she already uses Kahoot.
Okay. Yeah, without being too much of a downer, I don't love those. You can use them. And again, sometimes maybe your goal isn't about really in-depth use of the target language at that moment. You know your students, you know the dynamics of the classroom. Maybe they need a little light, um, few minutes, 10 minutes, Friday afternoon, whatever. Use it as you wish. But where I would more want to steer is using that language in context to do something beyond like a quiz practice. I think games that are going to use language to do that can be really helpful though. And sometimes a game like Kahoot or Trash Get Ball or some of those, if you are using the language yourself to talk about the game, then you're creating something through the use of the language. However, if it's more or less, oh, the students are talking in English, but it's a French classroom, you're wanting them to learn and gain French from your class, then I would see how can you steer the students towards a richer language experience through the game. One of the ones that I have liked for that reason has been, it's like you could call it elimination, where it's setting up the whole game is an imaginative game where the students each have a role and someone is it depends on the permutations of the game, but one version of it is Erica Peplinsky-Burge she calls it bad unicorn. And so the unicorn is going to choose someone else during part of the game. It's hard to explain it. you should look this up if this is appealing though. So bad unicorn. So there's one student is secretly this bad unicorn. They will point out to the teacher, who is the moderator of the game, students one at a time in the class that they are going to target for playing a prank on them. And then everybody is secret, they have their heads down and they're quiet. And then the teacher is narrating what happens when the bad unicorn picks a student. And nobody knows who the bad unicorn is. The teacher tells the story of what happens to the student, and that's how they find out who the student is. She's expert at it, so I would look for her work on that. So again, we're definitely creating something through the language. We're only able to play because we're using the target language to talk with each other and understand the messages of it. So I would look that direction. If you feel like you need to review vocabulary with students, maybe taking those words and then creating something together as a review kind of a thing. It's like one word at a time stories. I've done that before, where it was to use vocabulary again, I would have them draw a word from a stack of flashcards or something. And then we would make one sentence at a time and try to link it together into this kind of silly story-like thing, using all familiar words, but ones that I felt they needed more fluency with. So that might be another possibility.
Okay, last question. I think you may have hit on it a little bit earlier during the slides and presentation, but the teacher asks, when you choose topics, i.e. pets, are you choosing topics that will use certain language, how to use many, etc.? Or is it more about engaging students in a specific language and it's not as important what the topics are? I know that you mentioned some about autonomy. I know that you mentioned some about having a lot of different things you need to focus on in the classroom. Any additional tips? We just have a few more minutes.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think especially as language teachers, I think our experiences as language students often leans us this way. I think our sense of accountability to the school also tends to lean us this way. If we can avoid having to teach based on lists of words, it's going to be very freeing, I think. Ultimately, it's scary at first because if you're used to planning based on that kind of that list of a chapter with a long list of vocabulary, and you know how to do that, if you're thinking about purpose as the driving point, that communicative purpose is going to help you determine what language is necessary instead of the other way around, like choosing the words and then trying to make them purposeful can be hard. But if you start with the purpose, like I want to learn about pandas, then, okay, how much detail can we go into with these brand new novice learners? Not much detail. What about an intermediate level class? We can go pretty detailed with them at that point. So we want to think about the learners and the purpose and their proficiency level. I feel like I've jumped over a thing that I was going to say about it. Can you prompt me again with that question? Because I had another
Sure.
thought back there.
They were asking about having topics. Are you choosing topics for conversations? Oh, sounds like you know where you're going.
Yes, that did it. Yeah, yeah. And so it's going to also depend on what you're expected to do at your school. If you have the freedom and flexibility to plan based on like a can-do statement kind of a thing, where it's like you're wanting students to develop this kind of ability with the language, so that when we are learning about this in the classroom, then they can understand how to interpret the meaning of messages about that. They can interact with others around that topic. They can present simple messages about that topic by the time we're done with this unit. If you can orient towards those goals instead of students will know these 50 terms by the end of October or something like that, like this, that kind of makes sense there. If you have a required curriculum, I understand that that list of 50 may not be a negotiable thing. And so you make the best of what you can. You focus in on the words that are more useful for you and your students at that time. You find topics that will help you to talk about many of those words on the list. That kind of thing it's manageable, but ultimately I think it's not quite as ideal as building based on stories, on topics we can investigate together on those communicative purposes.
Excellent. Then thank you. I think that we've hit on all the questions. That was a great presentation. Any last statements?
Let's see. Thank you for coming. That's, I'm very honored by having you attend a webinar that I would give. And please do feel free to find me online. I'm excited to get to hear about what's happening in language classrooms all the time.